Hello, this is Julian with Coffea Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Mejorado WX wash processed Ecuador from Coffea Circulor. And there's the bag right there. And Coffea Circulor, based out of Gothenburg, Sweden. And this is the long overdue final part of our Coffea Circulor Gothenburg series. As a quick reminder on this series is that we purchased a number of Gothenburg coffees released by Coffea Circulor a while back, with the exception of this one, as this coffee had not been released yet. So when I saw Coffea Circulor release this coffee, I knew we had to purchase it to complete the series. In addition to that, it's a coffee that excites me a lot because it is a Mejorado coffee from Coffea Circulor. So for a number of reasons, I'm definitely looking forward to discussing this one and completing this series, as this right here is day 38. And recipe we went with for this coffee was Coffea Circulor's recipe at a 15:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 95 degrees Celsius, about 203 degrees Fahrenheit, and like this one best through the V60, which indicates a more medium fine grind. Roast profile for this coffee. So it is kind of interesting, as the experiences we've had from this coffee roaster in the past have definitely been on the lighter side of things. And while this coffee is still on the lighter side of things, it didn't feel quite as light as a number of the coffees that we have had from them in the past. I feel like they might have pushed this one, as well as some of the coffees we're going to be discussing from them, a little bit more than our previous experiences. So this one, while still light, I would say is a little bit more on that moderately light side of things. With all that out of the way, let's go and start discussing this coffee. Day 14, first impression, and we ran it to the V60 with the cup offering an abundance of depth, as there's a slight earthy base to it, but it's complemented well by an abundance of fruit characteristics, including the listed blueberry with a darker berry feel that seems to open up a fair bit on the cool down itself. A slight bit of sugariness as well, but it is slightly marred by an ever so slight smoky quality to it. Mostly positive start, but once again, that did seem to take away from that experience overall. Day 17 through the Chemex, and the cup has settled much better the second time around, as there's a improved focus on the sugary and candied aspects of this coffee. Listed toffee felt quite apt, as it had a lot of the classic Mejorado-like sweetness to it. While sweet, it does not necessarily skew away from the primary focus being this slight fruit brightness, as well as this tea-like attribute, giving the cup some depth in general. So plenty of things to take away, some positives on the second day as well. We continue on to day 20, as we opted for the April brewer, and there's a slight bit more of the tea-like attributes on this day, with the earthy tone also present, especially right off brew. There's some wonderful stone fruit aspects that are present in a subtle but also pronounced sense, as it does continue to cool down in that Mejorado brown candy-like sense one more time. We continue on to day 23, as we opted for the V60 with Coffea Circulor's recipe, and the cup was the best it had been to this point by a distance, as it's offering more of the fruit qualities as well as the blueberry and stone fruit attributes in a significantly better defined sense. And that was a little bit of a surprise, as I typically have mixed experiences with Mejorado coffees in general, especially when it comes to the stone fruit aspects, as I really crave getting a lot more of those out of them, because if I can get that accompanied by that very strong Mejorado like brown candy sweetness, then I am really working with a very enjoyable coffee, as this one transitions into plenty of those brown candy attributes once again, with terrific structure and depth. So this was a really impressive day. We continue on to day 26, as we opted for the Chemex with Coffea Circulor's recipe, and it was now the best it had been up to this point. So I'm definitely seeing improvement from this coffee with time. Much more of the traditional Mejorado brown candy-like attributes yet again. Listed toffee felt very apt. Anytime a coffee roaster puts any of those things on a note for a Mejorado coffee, so specifically caramel, toffee, or something even like honey or honeysuckle, then I can definitely see those, as that's just that Mejorado brown candy-like sweetness that I reference in so many coffees. And I've had a number of people reach out to us and say, okay, I'm finally experiencing it. I can finally see it with this coffee. This one right here, given that it had that note, I said, okay, perfect. I'm already feeling this. And since this note is on here, it all feels very apt, as the sugariness is very strong. Plenty of the fruit brightness yet again, but it is now skewed much more in the sweeter side of things, so it was definitely a very enjoyable day. Day 28 through the V60 with our standard recipe, and it does continue to improve. So that's when I came to the consensus that regardless of what we're doing with this coffee, it just seems to improve in general, as it has a very high level of intense Mejorado-like sweetness, yet again with a strong abundance of those brown candied attributes. A lovely bit of fruit brightness again with more of these stone fruits and a fresh fruit sweeter sense, and as a result it was a terrific day, getting more and better definition to a lot of the other fruit characteristics within this one. So just getting a very well-rounded cup. Continue on to day 31 as we opted for the V60, and it has been pretty consistent with a lot of the Mejorado brown candy sweetness being very strong and abundant throughout. Previously mentioned depth in terms of the fruit sense continues to remain present as it feels like the coffee is continuing to peak some more. Very nice day. Day 34, final notes we have back to the V60 and wonderfully sweet and intense with the fruit and brown candy components. Improvement yet again, and I mostly ran out of space to continue writing notes, but here we go one more time on day 38, and this coffee does continue to improve ever so slightly. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. We have one level 5, so let's go through that one real quick. And to no one's surprise, it is the sweetness at a level 5. So going into this one, I was hoping that it would reach that level 5 in terms of the sweetness, and it definitely did, as these Mejorado coffees just continue to be so unbelievably sweet, and this one is no exception in that regard in any capacity. I think they have something along the lines of sugar as well as the toffee list on here, and you can feel those in notable abundance throughout. So sweetness definitely justified there at the level 5. And when it comes to these Mejorado coffees, it's getting kind of repetitive to keep talking about the sweetness being there at that level 5. Obviously, it's that Mejorado brown candy-like attribute. But outside of that, I do have to say, it's maybe a little bit more of that true level 5. There have been some Mejorados where I'm like, this is just skyrocketing so high, level 6, level 7 or something. I'm like, it barely reaches that higher level 4. This one's a little bit more of that true level 5. Handful of level 4s. We'll start with the cleanliness level 4. For Mejorado coffees, I do have to say that this one is actually on the cleaner side of things, as I'm able to get just a little bit more of the definition to some of the other attributes. So I don't typically taste a lot of the other fruit characteristics in as defined of a manner as it was in this coffee, most specifically the stone fruit aspects of it. So that's a huge testament and credit to Coffea Circulor on this one, as I feel like they did a very good job of bringing those characteristics out within this coffee. Finish, level 4. I mean, obviously it's going to be the Mejorado brown candy-like sweetness that continues to linger within this coffee. Plenty of sweeter characteristics. Don't necessarily feel the need to discuss that one too much, but we continue on to stone fruit, level 4. That's going to be one of the best parts of this coffee. I was fully expecting it to be sweet, fully hoping it was going to be sweet, hoping it would be clean, but the listed, I think they have nectarine on here. That's what I was kind of curious to see if I was able to get that, as well as the berry attributes of it. And to my surprise, it was so well defined on certain days, and given that it complemented the other components, specifically the sweetness of this coffee, very well, then that was a huge winner for me when it came to this coffee. So I really appreciate that one, and that's why it scored as high as it did at that level 4. Caramel, level 4. Obviously, that's that Mejorado brown candy-like sweetness. Toffee that they have listed on there, put all of that right there in that note. I don't really have too much to add to it. It's something that we've discussed a lot, not just within this coffee, but Mejorado coffees in general. We continue on, handful of level 3s. We'll start with the acidity level 3. As I've said before, I don't know if it's because of the recipe that we use or what the case is, but oftentimes Coffea Circulor's coffees don't necessarily tend to be the brightest coffees. This one is no exception to that either, as it's scoring there at that level 3. Florality, level 3, and I feel like I'm kind of lumping that into the honey category, as I kind of mentioned that sort of floral honey attribute that is also associated with Mejorado coffees. That was kind of the best place to put this one. Berry fruit, level 3. And that's a kind of interesting one to discuss, because we mentioned on one of the first days that there was that darker berry attribute to this one, but I do have to say that there were certain times where it was just as pronounced and defined as the stone fruit-like attribute, which definitely did give this one some more depth as well. Even when I was making this tasting wheel, I said there's some pretty nice definition, and I can feel this one, especially when I seem to focus in on it. I think the main reason we didn't discuss it more was mostly because there were other things that were at play that were a little bit more pronounced in this coffee. So even then, having that at level 3 just gives this coffee a little bit more depth in general. We continue on to the savoriness at level 3, and that of course is the sort of earthy tea-like attributes to this one. I think that they have something along the lines of a green tea note listed on here, and that would definitely make a lot of sense, as there were plenty of those earthy tones to kind of complement the additional components within this one. Two other things worth discussing. I'm going to briefly mention the body at that level 2. And with Mejorado coffees, it's kind of a crapshoot. You're using it a 3 or 2. I don't think I've had any that I've scored higher or lower than that. So this one right here on the lower side of the body when it comes to the Mejorado coffees. But one of the more important things to discuss is the smokiness at the level 2. I mentioned it early on, and I also discussed it within the roast profile itself, as it's not something that I was necessarily expecting from this coffee. It just seemed to have that, and I'm not entirely sure if that was maybe a component of some of the earthiness to this coffee. But as we're going to be reviewing a number of other coffees from them, it's a little bit of a theme I experienced from these set of coffees that we had from Coffea Circulor specifically. So that one did belong there at that level 2 mark, and it did play an ever so slight role in this coffee. But outside of that, as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it's a pretty good representation of what we were getting from this coffee. Alright, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. Interestingly enough, I feel like I've been somewhat talking this one down because I enjoyed it a little bit more than even I was expecting. I did go into this one with some very high expectations. I should actually say that I went into this one with kind of moderate to high expectations. I did receive a sample of this coffee when we were reviewing the last series of Gala Morales coffees, so I knew that this one was going to be released and I knew we were going to review it. And when I was trying that sample, I said to myself, okay, this coffee is good, but I think my expectations for it were much higher. If I do get an opportunity to play around with this coffee a lot more, I'm going to be able to see if I can get more from this coffee, and I was. It just took a little bit of work, but that being said, as far as Mejorado coffees go, this one has to be one of my favorite that we have reviewed this year as of this moment, mostly because it offered some additional depth to it, so it had a lot of the characteristics I was looking for. The sweetness, that brown candy attribute, great clarity. And while it wasn't very high in terms of the floral components to it, I think the additional bit of fruit depth that it offered specifically in the stone fruit sense, as well as that kind of complementary berry attribute to it, did give this one just a little bit more than some of the other Mejorado coffees we had while not sacrificing any of the other components. I think maybe the one thing that might be preventing this one from being any higher in my impression is that ever so slight smoky quality to it, which once again, we've actually reviewed we have a review coming up for another Mejorado coffee that also offered that, so I'm not entirely sure what to necessarily make of that. But as I'm just kind of looking back and reflecting on this coffee, I think I was just really impressed by this one relative to some of the other Gala Morales coffees, and it doesn't necessarily seem like I'm as high on it as I am, but I do have to say that this one was actually a very nice coffee and one of the more enjoyable ones that we've reviewed from Coffea Circulor recently as well. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, if you've really enjoyed your Mejorado coffees, then I feel like this one's going to be another shining example of what this varietal has to offer, as it continues to skew in the very heavily sweet side of things, as well as the clean and brown candy-like attribute side of things. In addition to that, just a little bit more depth in general, specifically in terms of the fruit focus. So it has all of the things that you're looking for, and that's why it was a big winner for me, and that's the best direction I can point somebody towards for this one, as well as the best way to leave this review. If you've by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Mejorado WX, wash processed Ecuador from Coffea Circulor. Thank you for watching.